Hi, everybody. Welcome to this Billsley Research School webinar on a spotlight on teaching assistants, unlocking potential for effective development. My name is Nick Harrison, and I'm joined by my colleague, Victoria Day, and we're going to be talking you through the updated guidance report on the deployment of teaching assistants. Just really bearing in mind that kind of key quote that's on the screen there: teaching assistants are crucial to the work of schools. Supporting them to have maximum impact is a strategic issue for leadership. So it really is a leadership responsibility and opportunity, and that's what we're going to be thinking about today. Okay, so we know that teaching assistants play a vital role in our schools and colleges. So this guidance really celebrates the contribution. It really acknowledges how much teaching assistants do for us in schools, how much of an impact teaching assistants can make. But it really thinks about as well how it can be quite complex using teaching assistants. We really want to think about ways we can maximize the impact. So the guidance report highlights effective teaching, assistant deployment, high quality teaching, and also leadership decisions involved in the deployment of teaching assistants. So it's a really good guidance report. We're going to kind of dig deep into it and look at the recommendations as we go.
Thanks, Nick. So here are the 5 key recommendations that we're going to explore, that we're going to go through this afternoon, so that this is hopefully then a reflection opportunity for you to think that you are really making the most of that really fantastic, valuable resource that we know we've got, our TAs, and how we can maximise the way we deploy them so we can support all children, particularly those children we know who need that big dose, and those adults can make that huge difference then for them. So just thinking, I mentioned the word reflection, is just thinking about in terms of the way your teacher assistants work at the moment and the way you deploy them, does it align with this best practice, this guidance report? Because we want to make sure that what they're doing is making a difference to those most disadvantaged learners, because we know quite often they're working with them. We tend to have them working with our children in the classroom, but we really want to make sure they're making the biggest difference for them. So let's start by having a look at the first recommendation. So it's deploy teaching assistants in ways that enable all pupils to access high quality teaching. So we know that teaching assistants, RTAs, should supplement, not replace the teacher. So really thinking about our daily routine, thinking about, it's made me really think about sort of our habits that we formed across our timetable, across our week, to really think about where our TAs are, who has which groups, really where, who's working with particular groups of children across foundation subjects. It made me particularly also think about phonics groups for me, and which groups are our TAs working with, and it's made us really think about sort of adjusting groups so that teachers then are working with our most vulnerable students, so they're getting that dose also from the teacher. So in thinking about that, then it really makes me think about that high quality teaching. So yes, we need to think about that. We don't want our TAs to replace, and thinking about that expertise of the teacher. It's made me think about the level of scaffolding, the level of support that TAs give our children, and ultimately that we're not thinking about Velcro approaches, that we ultimately want to pitch the level of support for the children that our TAs are working with, that ultimately that support's temporary, so that when the TAs move away from the children, then they can thrive and flourish independently. It made me think about targeted interventions, about the interventions that we use in school, and whether it's TAs that are always delivering those, and have we as teachers got a really good insight into what's going on within some of those interventions, and also about our training plan for our teacher assistants in school, and just who needs that that training, and are we giving the same sort of training dose to our TAs that we give to our teachers, so we're all singing from the same hymn sheet to give our children exactly what they need. So the report emphasises that effective TA deployment is about creating collaborative, well prepared and focused partnerships between teachers and TAs, thinking about these 4 elements here. So as we said, we don't want them to replace what we're doing as teachers. So we're really sort of setting the foundations for our thoughts this afternoon. Over to you, Nick, for recommendation 2.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Victoria. We really need to think about using teaching assistants to really drive independence in our pupils. What we don't want to see is that we are just using teaching assistants to complete work for pupils. And we want to see progress over that time that they have in schools, whether that's primary or secondary settings. So teaching assistants are really there to scaffold the learning. That's the key. And really promote that independence. Scaffolding practices can take different forms, and we'll have a look at that in just a second. But this is really about equipping the teaching assistants with a range of scaffolding strategies that are appropriate. Now, that means it's appropriate to their age, it means appropriate to their subject, and obviously primary colleagues, I'm always in awe of you because you teach across the spectrum of subjects. So how can that teaching assistant help within that spectrum of subjects? And then secondary colleagues, it's about really knowing your subject inside out. How can a teaching assistant help to support that pupil? And also their individual needs, because we know that our pupils who are in need of support from teaching assistants will have a wide range of needs. So really tracking those individual needs and making sure those scaffolds are suitable for those pupils. We know that scaffolds have to be removed over time as well when we're ready to do it. So that is a really key part of that, just making sure that over time those scaffolds are removed so pupils can complete things independently. So the guidance report offers some really good evidence-based approaches with regards to scaffold. So this is just an example of a graphic that's from the report. And it talks about different strategies. You can even kind of do that metacognitively, thinking about the steps that you're taking. You can think about scaffold in terms of verbal scaffolds. You can think about written scaffolds. You could think about word banks. You could think about seating arrangements. There is so much to it with regards to the recommendations and what they suggest. And then there's some more information here on scaffolding, on the intention of scaffolding. Remember, it's supposed to be a temporary support. If the scaffold is always there, you are never building that independence. So the scaffolding has to be removed over time, and it has to be seen as a temporary support for pupils. But really crucially, the teaching assistant needs to know, what you want that scaffold to look like. And potentially the teaching assistant can collaborate with that with you, think about their knowledge of the pupil and what they need, so you can come to that kind of shared vision of what that scaffold is and then when it can be reduced over time to build that independence.
Thanks, Nick. This, in terms of scaffolding, my role within early years, this has been really useful to think about the stairs model. Because yes, we know all of our teaching assistants, we've said during a PD session that all TAs want to be involved in those high quality interactions, face to face, those moments of sustained shared thinking, and they want children to thrive and support them through modelling, through introducing, through showing and modelling what it is in terms of skills and knowledge. So, for example, whether it's completing a cutting activity, is that they want to feel that they're supporting the children and giving them the just right Goldilocks principle, just the right level of support, so that a child, as it says here, doesn't become too frustrated. However, that so it's too challenging, but also it isn't too easy. So just really thinking about, it's been really useful to have this sort of principle of, this idea of the Goldilocks principle, and our staff are saying, we just can gauge what's right for each child within our EYFS. So it's not too much, not too little, just right. So it's a really useful guidance.
Comfortable struggle, isn't it, within the middle? They're not in panic mode. It's not too easy. There is an element of struggle, and obviously that they can attempt something maybe before the TAs intervene, before you intervene.
Thanks. So thinking about recommendation 3, we mentioned about interventions. Is structured interventions for our children who need the most, we know can make such impact, and we know that the evidence door and talks about, those evidence-informed strategies that we can look at. So we really need to think carefully about, as recommendation 3 says, which interventions we're using. So it's made us really think about what interventions do we already use through school, which ones are working well. Let's have, the new ones we need to seek. So again, going back to the EF to think about those tried and tested best bets for interventions. So again, really thinking about, are we adhering to the evidence when we're thinking about which intervention suits our children, identifying those gaps, how they learn best. So that, and also thinking about the challenges here in this reflection question is, what were the challenges and what were the enablers to ensure our teacher assistants were effectively deployed in terms of fitting in with our pupil premium strategy. So we really want to think about that we're maximising our adults so that they're making best difference for our most disadvantaged learners. Again, going back to early years is, again, looking at those tried and tested, those highly rated intervention programs, such as the Nellie program here, focusing on the recommendation, knowing that then the evidence base is there for this particular intervention. Those are the ones we want to go to. So the Nuffield language intervention, we know that it's part of the Best Start in Life agenda as well. But thinking about other interventions, so again, we use Wellcome as our universal screening tool, and we want to also maximise the impact that that's having beyond an intervention tool, because again, thinking about utilising and maximising the use of our adults. So we've really thought about how we can seed the environment, enhance our environment also, so our environment can work really hard for us in terms of, for example, thinking about our environment of thinking about grading opportunities within our sand and water area, within our small world area. So really thinking about how we can also design our environment so that our adults can meet those interventions as well, support children's communication and language through their daily interactions. And that takes careful planning, sharing those individual needs of children, and with a whole team, so we can plan effectively, and how we can meet children's and close gaps through our interventions such as Nellie, but also through our daily interactions by carefully planning the environment and informing our team. So again, like we said, who are our pupils and would this intervention attend to their needs? So all the time, if reflecting on what intervention we're currently using for our children, whether it's communication and language, reading, is it meeting the needs that, is it leading to the impact we're looking for? And if it's not, we really want to step back and think what can be changed. So again, some of the questions, some of the tools available, supplementary tools, we will share the resources with you at the end of our webinar. But utilising those guidance tools to really reflect on the effectiveness of your intervention and what you're doing already. So some following sort of guidance questions, and like we said, is we really want to think that what we are doing is making the most for those children, and our adults are supporting those children so that they move forward and close those gaps. Over to you for recommendation 4, Nick.
Thanks, Victoria. So recommendation 4 is basically all about that preparation, that training of your staff for that effective deployment of teaching assistants. And this really is a school leadership responsibility, and it really should be a priority. How are those adults being used within the classroom? And then also, what kind of training opportunities and collaboration opportunities are you giving for your teachers and for your teaching assistants to really work together to make sure you maximize the impact? So you need to have that clear idea of what your teaching assistant role is, and that really needs to be articulated well, prepared well, so it increases that likelihood that you can have a positive impact on pupils. So that clarity of role, I said, is really, really important. And it's important that everybody knows what that role is within the school. The teaching assistants themselves, obviously clarity through their job description, but then also the teachers know what the role of that teaching assistant is. And then within the classroom, the role the teacher wants that teaching assistant to do, and that the teaching assistant is really clear on that within a specific classroom as well. It really enables them to be more effective in their role. It enables effective working relationship, between the teacher and the teaching assistant. And then it's just great professional development for the teaching assistant and for the teacher to be able to work collaborative, to be able to work together. So they need to have that ongoing coordination and communication. And really, it might be that day-to-day role needs to be really communicated because, as I said, the needs of the pupils might be different. And I know in primary schools, you may have dedicated teaching assistants attached to classes throughout the day. That may be different in secondary school. So that context, your own context is really important, but having that clear, defined role. It is a deliberate action. Okay, so this report emphasizes that they really need to be clear on their roles. If you don't have clarity of roles for your teaching assistants and your teachers and how they work together, that can cause some problems, potentially within the working relationships of those adults, those individuals, but then also in the impact that it has on the pupils. So it kind of sounds straightforward, but it's really, really important that it happens from the outset. You have to have that deliberate approach to developing your workforce. Remember that TAs, they have an entitlement to that same development opportunities through coaching, professional development programs that your teachers do to make them feel valued, to make sure they're completely clear on what their role is. And I suppose it adds to that sense of accountability as well. Everybody knows what they're responsible for and what they should be working towards. Okay, so again, it's got some really good graphics within the guidance report, which we'll provide a link for you to at the end. But it kind of gives you actual practical strategies, opportunities, things that you can think of with regards to this training and how it can happen, whether it's little short briefings, whether it's dedicated planning time together, where it's kind of essential information that a need to knows or teaching assistants might provide about pupils, or teachers might provide to teaching assistants about pupils. Really, the key is that support, that collaboration, and that development of the teacher and of the teaching assistant. We can't assume that a teacher knows how to most effectively use a teaching assistant. Especially, we might have teachers who are new to the profession, or we might have teachers that just haven't had a teaching assistant for a long time attached to them. We can't just presume that knowledge. So we really need to build in their training of how to make it effective and how to use them.
Thank you. Sorry, in terms of moves on to, as we move on to the next section, in terms of 5 is about and this, we know this recommendation in 5 is new and didn't feature in the previous guidance, and it focuses on, following from what Nick just mentioned, is it focuses on leadership and implementation, and acknowledges that recommendations made will only be effective if leaders, whole leaders within the school, all leaders are fully actively involved in this implementation, ensuring the best practices are integrated throughout sort of the cycle. So, as Nick just mentioned, it's about really thinking about, as Nick just mentioned, does every member of staff fully understand how to effectively deploy TAs and how TAs can scaffold learning effectively? What does that look like? How can we articulate that? Can everyone articulate that? Does everyone understand what that looks like in practice? And when we're monitoring that, do we know explicitly what to look for? And then planning, like we said, the complementary teacher, TA's roles in lessons, ensuring TAs understand the key learning goals and misconceptions that children have, sharing essential need to know information before lessons, as we said, so that preparedness is there. So as a school culture, as a school vision, many of us are thinking this now, preparing for transitions, whether we've got new members of staff, new teaching assistants, building on what Nick said, moving into different year groups, into different phases of how are we, giving our teachers, our TAs, the skills and knowledge they need so they can really make the most of their role, and ultimately then children can reap those benefits, or children can thrive. So one of the tools that's really useful, that we found really useful, is looking at this editable, is this one of the useful tools. This has been published by EEF to help structure thinking and put plans into action. It provides useful reflection prompts to help leaders examine the rationale and intended outcomes of the changes, if we're thinking about changes we want to put into place, thinking about ready for the next academic year, as well as the resources and support required for success. Research tells us that this process is best undertaken in partnership with relevant staff members. So really thinking about, are we timetabling that time? Is we know we've said, we want to maximise the use of teacher assistants. Often they're tied up within the classroom, so, and again with teachers, is how can we effectively make time and timetable that time for our teachers and teaching assistants to work together, so that we can really think about preparing this ready for September. To ensure we find those opportunities to engage, unite colleagues in reflections and discussions around TA deployment together. So again, just some of those reflection questions which are really useful for us to think about. Like we said, do all children have access to high quality teaching with their class teacher? Are TAs well supported to be able to scaffold learning for pupils effectively? Are the interventions carefully selected, implemented and de-implemented if necessary? Really making sure we're going for those best bets. We're only really doing those things that are going to make the most for our children. Are teachers confident and skilled in TA deployment? And does the TA have a clear role which has been communicated to them well? And we know the barriers that can be there, that if our teacher assistants timetable and working day is they arrive on the bell, and they go at the end of the day, is how can we find that time? How can we have those conversations with them so everyone feels ready for learning? So does your school have a key member of SLT who has that oversight of TA deployment? Is it everyone's business to do that? So everyone's got that shared culture, that shared vision and shared understanding together. So over to you for final thoughts and close, Nick.
Thanks, Victoria. So it's really important, and we hope you can see the real value of TAs. And we know, and I know from personal experience, when you have a TA that really is secure in what they're doing in the classroom, they are worth their weight in gold. They're not just additional adults in the room. They really help you to co-construct and deconstruct ideas, concepts, but really co-construct that learning for the pupils. And quite often they know the pupils better, actually, than some of the teachers do. And that's especially true in a secondary setting, because they are with the pupils across the curriculum, whereas I maybe am with them for just one subject. So leaders, it's really important we recognise this by investing in their development. They have to be really seen as important figures in your school, really thought about as staff members that you can really develop, you can really push. And if you're not there yet, you need to move towards hopefully that cultural shift where you really see the value in those teaching assistants and your teachers do in the classroom as well. When we get it right with TAs, as it says there, we get it right for children. Because ultimately, that's what they're there. They're there to build that independence in children, so that they can flourish. So it is really a change that is worth kind of looking at. So within the guidance report, we've also got some kind of key takeaways, things for maximising the impact of TAs. A lot of these things we have talked about. That strategic deployment is really, really important, about seeing where they are best suited, where you need those teaching assistants within your school. And the idea that they really are in the classroom to support, to co-construct the learning. So really be strategic when thinking about where you want to place those teaching assistants and who they work with. We know that they can build stronger relationships with some pupils than others. So think about who is best suited to work with who. You've got your structured interventions, and Victoria spoke a lot about that. It's sometimes that they may be constructing those interventions. It may be interventions that you have constructed as a teacher or as a leader, and you want the teaching assistants to use. If that's the case, they need that expert kind of coaching in how you want that intervention to take place. And we know that interventions should be quite short, should be structured in those small groups to be more impactful. Your pedagogy and training, so training TAs to scaffold. Remember that scaffolding can take lots of different forms, and that may be different depending on the age, the work that's being covered, the subject, the need of that particular child. So that takes a lot of thought process, scaffolding. It's just not as simple as a couple of sentence starters. It could be a starting point, but there is a lot more to it than that. TAs, remember, are there to try and really push that independence in pupils. So they're not just kind of learning alongside the pupil, they're helping the pupil to manage that learning and be more independent. Investing in that professional development, again, for TAs, for your teachers as well, that they can work together collaboratively, that they know what is expected of them and of each other and how they work together. And that really folds into number four, those partnerships. They're absolutely key of having that real key link between the teacher and the TA. Remember that the teacher we know has that responsibility for all of the pupils within the class, including those working with the TA, but the TA can really support in the development of that independence and then hopefully improve outcomes for pupils. So we've kind of listed a list of resources which we think are important for you to look at. Obviously, the main crux of this webinar has been about the guidance report. They produce, all the guidance reports produce really good summary posters because they are quite lengthy documents, the guidance reports. The summary posters are really good at breaking down the key recommendations with key strategies for each recommendation for you to look at. Victoria, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that before we finish.
No, Nick, like you said, we've thought about the report, thinking about sort of across the phases, haven't we? And I said my roots are focused in early years, thinking about those, how valuable those early years practitioners are in terms of delivering those high quality interactions, but really thinking maximising them to make a difference for those children who need it the most. But absolutely, as well as the guidance reports, also we said about the STAIRS model. There's also the SHREC model as well, which can frame our high quality interactions. But like we said, going onto the evidence store, you'll see the whole suite there. But thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, everybody. Bye.